Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear.
And I'll tell you something else, too, is I cannot stand sissies.
You're going to talk about wrestling, that's redneck talk.
And guess what, fatso? I'm the world champion.
Hey everybody, Carl Stern here for the 1,000 Hours podcast series. This series is all about the pioneer era of professional wrestling. This is hour number 55, and we want to thank their sponsor for this episode, Slim. Thank you very much, Slim, for supporting us. You can sponsor an episode of 1,000 Hours one of two ways, very simple. Become a Patreon supporter at whenitwascool.com, and we will dedicate an hour of this show to you. So simply sign up, get instant access to over 2,300 podcasts in our archives, plus the entire 1,000 Hour series and much, much more. Or if you're already a Patreon supporter or for whatever reason don't want to do Patreon, you can make a direct donation. That helps our research, helps our podcast series, and more. PayPal or Cash App, the links are on the front page of whenitwascool.com. Thank you all for supporting us. So this show is kind of going to roll directly out of the last show. And I was talking about the research I had been doing on 1880. I've done about the first half of 1880 right now. And we had been talking about the fake Andre Cristal, Lucian Mark. We talked about the real Andre Cristal returning. We had been talking about the very entertainment-oriented fake hippodroning of Greco-Roman back in the day. We had talked about Colonel James H. McLaughlin getting drug into that world. We've seen some early highlights of William Muldoon as he's coming into that world as well. We talked about Professor Theobald Bauer and Professor William Miller. And so that's where we are in the world at this time. Your American collar and elbow champion. If you hear the American heavyweight title, you talk about the earliest championship in American pro wrestling, the earliest major championship. That's the American collar and elbow title. It is presently here in spring of 1880 held by H.M. Duffer, Henry Moses Duffer. And he had won that championship from James Owens. And we talked about James Owens being part of a rather large wrestling family, the first large wrestling family in pro wrestling. John McMahon, he's a cousin to John McMahon. His brother Peter Owens is a wrestler. There's another cousin named Ed Cox, who is a top-level professional wrestler. So the four members of that family, major wrestlers, and John McMahon had been American champion. James Owens had been American champion. He had lost it to H.M. Duffer. And H.M. Duffer is swapping out wins for some reason with G.W. Flagg. And G.W. Flagg's not getting any credit for being the American the American collar and elbow champion. Historically, or even at that time, he's not given credit for. So I'm not really sure what's exactly going on. We've got a clue maybe of what's happening there, but for whatever reason, that's what's transpiring. Now, the next American heavyweight champion will be coming up in the fall. We got named Duncan C. Ross, and we're starting to see him making appearances up in Canada, Toronto, and Montreal, and even soon he'll be down in New York. He's making his way up the ladder now. Colonel James H. McLaughlin has kind of disappeared for the last little bit. We talked about him in the last episode. He puts on some fake matches with Andre Cristal, the real Andre Cristal this time. And then McLaughlin is just going to sort of fade out, take another one of his long breaks from wrestling. James Owens is not really doing much either. He's popping up here and there. But let's face it, James Owens, as the American heavyweight champion, he wasn't that active a champion either. He took long sabbaticals from that as well. And H.M. Duffer is not part of that New York scene. He's not part of Harry Hill's group, and so he's kind of the I guess the prestige of the American Collar and Elbow Championship, as far as being reported in the newspapers, has kind of fallen back a little bit. Greco-Roman has certainly been the darling of the newspapers the last little bit because it's so outrageous. It's obviously a fake style. the papers, much like media in modern era, when I was growing up, they relished in pointing out, this is entertaining, it makes lots of money, there's thousands of people here to see it, and it's fake, right? You know it's fake, right? Well, they were doing that with Greco-Roman back in the day as well. So we're up, and we're just going to start here. I think I talked about this note, but we're just last episode. We'll start in March of 1880 and kind of catch up. March the 1st, 1880, New York City, New York at Temperance Hall as part of a boxing show. Collar and elbow rules. William Johnson beat John McDonald. March the 2nd, 1880, Reno, Nevada Theater, attendance 150 people. A.L. Hurd defeated Angelo Caldera for the championship of Reno. And speaking of these old Wild West towns and stuff, there's a lot of that going on out there. Deadwood, South Dakota, on the same day, March 2nd, 1880. Cooley and Doherty's Theater. The attendance, quote, large crowd. Leopold Arnott defeated A. Sarrater in a mixed style match. Sarrater refused to wrestle in Greco-Roman style and was disqualified by the referee. March the 4th, 1880, New York City, New York, Madison Square Garden, attendance 3,000. Now, this was part of a mixed amateur athletic show. Wrestling wasn't the primary event on it. That's why the crowd's so large. They were having races. They were having strongman, track and field type stuff. We've heard of New York policeman James Quigley before. There are several members of the New York Police Department that are wrestling. Most prominently is Officer William Muldoon, although they're threatening him. Every time he wrestles, they're threatening him with his job because he's gotten tied up in this very disreputable Greco-Roman stuff going on. But Quigley, he's been in the papers a few times too, and he's considered a legit wrestler. Now, he's part of this amateur athletic show, so that suggests that Quigley hasn't been paid to wrestle at any point. But he defeats another police officer, James Pilkington, in Greco-Roman wrestling. Pilkington's thumb was broken, and he couldn't continue the match. March the 5th, 1880, New York City, New York at Terrace Gardens, attendance 300. William Johnson defeated Charles Murphy in 2 falls of collar and elbow. And that's notable because Charles Murphy was a fairly established collar and elbow wrestler. At one point in time, he had made a claim for the American Collar and Elbow Championship as well, so he's not some unknown. But speaking of an unknown, March 8th, 1880, in Little Rock, Arkansas, at the Opera House, Andre Cristal. Now, Andre Cristal has been wrestling over on the East Coast. Up in Chicago, Milwaukee, Cincinnati, Minneapolis, St. Louis, in that area, Lucian Mark, the face Andre Cristal, has been wrestling. I'm guessing, I don't know, the papers give no indication. And remember, the gig's been up. We talked about this last episode. Everybody knows Lucian Mark's the fake Andre Cristal. We even told you how to figure out who you had. The papers never seem to do this. But Andre Cristal in Little Rock, Arkansas, I'm not so sure. I question that. So I'm wondering if this was Lucian Mark wrestling as Andre Cristal. He defeated the unknown. And the unknown in this case was Ferdinand Delant in Greco-Roman. Now, the crowd wasn't buying this either. The crowd jeered most of the match and repeatedly chanted, "Put up job." Yes, 1880. March the 17th, 1880. John McMahon, the former American Collar and Elbow champion, wrestles the current American Collar and Elbow champion H.M. Duffer to a 6-hour draw without a fall in Boston, Massachusetts at the Music Hall in front of a crowd of 4,000. This thing went to like 4 in the morning. Speaking of which, this was a week for long matches. It said that neither could secure a fall. John McMahon certainly has he's been billing himself as the American Collar and Elbow champion, despite the fact H.M. Duffer is legitimately. So this really does nothing to answer the question of who the American Collar and Elbow champion is. Even the newspapers are questioning who should we call American collar and elbow champion, the belt of McLaughlin, the belt of James Owens. Who is it? Is it John McMahon? Is it H.M. Doofer? Is it G.W. Flags? In my opinion, got an honest grab for it. Who is it? They're going to argue about this for some time to come. Well, I said this was a week for long matches. 6-hour draw up in Boston. Well, let's go down to New York City. They're going to outdo them. March the 23rd, 1880, New York City, Madison Square Garden. Attendance 3,000 people. Officer William Muldoon battled Professor William Miller to a draw for the American Greco-Roman title. Match lasted for 7 hours until 4:30 a.m. The newspaper even said most of the crowd stuck around that long. Hard to believe, but they did. William Muldoon was becoming quite the superstar in New York. The papers were very much into the melodrama between he and the police department. Every time he wrestles, they threaten to fire him. He's been called a fake and a fraud by Professor Theobald Bauer, who unquestionably was a fake and a fraud. Professor William Miller is probably the most respected Greco-Roman wrestler on the East Coast at this point in time. But he, too, has had a falling out in the papers with William Muldoon. So it's interesting. It's interesting to say the papers are very much into William Muldoon at this point. April the 16th, 1880, New York City, New York at Harry Hill's Variety Theater. Yes, Harry Hill's Variety Theater. Harry Hill's a guy that not a lot's known about previous to, I think, my work here on this book, Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Era Wrestling Omnibus. Harry Hill was the prototype Vince McMahon. He was the early promoter. He was the early person running a combine. Originally, it was John McMahon and Homer Lane, but it branched out later on. Many other people, Bauer and Miller got involved. Even Colonel James H. McLaughlin got involved. Harry Hill's reach is far and wide, and anytime Harry Hill's name comes up in conjunction with the match, you have to consider there's a strong possibility that it's a worked match. All right, so here at Harry Hill's Variety Theater, Devon and Cornwall style. Now, here's a style they've thrown in on us we haven't seen much. The newspapers were appalled by this. They were like, "Oh, man, this is way rougher." I think they even said that Greco-Roman wrestling looked like ballet dancing next to Devon and Cornwall. So must have been something. But Edwin Bibby, we mentioned Beebe. Sorry, that's wrong. Edwin Beebe. He's a real deal guy from England. He beats Albert Ellis in 2 falls. Edwin Beebe was much bigger deal in England than he ever became in the United States. But he's a guy that had he wrestled a lot more here in the United States, certainly would have, I think, made a much bigger impact, because he seemed like a guy who, even the best of the day, real or not, had trouble with Edwin Beebe. Although since he's working at Harry Hill's, that's, makes you go, In a wrestling adjacent story, April 22nd, 1880, a large section of the second-story wall of Madison Square Garden in New York City collapses into the street, killing 4 people. Yes, a huge chunk of the wall fell off, killed some people, so that's going to be a problem there. They're going to renovate Madison Square Garden, and of course it's going to go on to be more elaborate in the future and stuff, but here for the moment it's literally falling apart and killing people in the streets. So your mecca of sports is going to be on hiatus for a minute. April 23rd, 1880, in Charleston, Massachusetts, at Monument Hall. Attendance is less than 50 people. G.W. Flagg wrestled William Hickey to a draw in collar and elbow. I've never come across William Hickey's name before, but that doesn't bode too well for G.W. Flagg, who has been swapping wins with the American heavyweight champion, H.M. Doofer, so I don't know what to make of this, really. April 24th, 1880, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Owen McCarthy defeated the American lightweight champion, Frank Robinson. So we got a title change here. Yes, there was light heavyweight championship. And look, these had about as much validity as the other belts. Everybody was some version of a champion back then. Every match seemed like was some version of a championship match. Now, to get up to what William Muldoon's doing here, April 29th, 1880, a meeting is held in New York City to try and arrange a future match for Officer William Muldoon. Muldoon holds a medal, which he says indicates he is the Greco-Roman world champion and will defend it in future matches. Now, he got this from Theobald Bauer. That's one Bauer accused him of doing a job for. Said, hey, yeah, Muldoon paid me to lose. But Muldoon says, no, this is the real deal. I'm the champion. I've got a medal to prove it, and I'll put it up against whoever. Muldoon is informed by a city councilman that if he wrestles any more publicly, he will be removed from the police force. And they did this all the time with him. May 6, 1880, New York City, New York, at Irving Hall, Edwin Beebe defeated Maximilian Mamou. That's a great name. That's a name straight out of the modern era. Maximilian Mamou in 2 falls. Harry Hill was the referee. May the 10th, 1880, Buffalo, New York at St. James Hall. John McMahon defeated The Unknown in a collar and elbow match. And this one's actually pretty good. The Unknown refused to unveil who he was. He come out and he's like, nope, not telling you all who he is. Well, the newspaper figured it out because they found some his initials stitched into a piece of his clothing. And it said JFK. Now, you may be saying to yourself, 1880, is this John F. Kennedy? You're right. This was John F. Kennedy. Well, not that John F. Kennedy, but this dude's name was really John F. Kennedy. He was the Unknown, and John McMahon beat him. So if you're ever playing on Jeopardy and it's ever asked, did John McMahon beat John F. Kennedy? The answer is yes. Yes, in fact, he did. I don't know what year the President John F. Kennedy was born. I know it was way later than 1880, but let's see, when was John F. Kennedy born? Let's see here. Could have asked my Alexa. 1917. So he's got, 37 years before JFK, the JFK we all know and love, was born. John McMahon was beating him up in Buffalo, New York. What a man John McMahon was. May 31st, 1880, Boston, Massachusetts. Michael Donahue defeated Nate Hutchins 3 out of 5 falls for the American Light Heavyweight Championship. Now, didn't we just have 2 different people wrestling for the American Light Heavyweight Championship somewhere else in Philadelphia? Yes, we did. Frank Robinson is supposed to be the American Light Heavyweight Champion, but up in Boston, they say not so fast. It is now Nate Hutchins who's the American Light Heavyweight Champion. So, you figure it out. June the 3rd, 1880, Boston, Massachusetts. Again, I love the name of this arena, the Howard Athenaeum. Howard Athenaeum. James Owens. Yes, James Owens, who couldn't be bothered much to defend the American collar and elbow title when he held it, hurt his foot, stayed vacant for a long time, or didn't wrestle with it. He's coasted off of being, John McMahon's cousin for a long time. Even put his brother in there, Peter Owens, to try to win the title for him in his stead while he was out. Anyway, he's back and doing a little wrestling. I shouldn't make too much fun of James Owens. He's going to be dead for the years out, I think. Got a lung disease. Anyway, he wrestled W.L. Johnson to a draw in collar and elbow style. Harry Hill was the referee, and John McMahon was in Owens' corner. No fall had been had during the match when the 2 men tumbled off the stage into the lighting area, and Johnson ended up with a large piece of glass in his foot. The match had to be ended due to injury, and the referee, Harry Hill, said it was a draw. Well, James Owens didn't like this. James Owens said, I will not wrestle for or with Harry Hill anymore. I don't know if this was a work or what. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, maybe we'll find out. But anyway, James Owens was mad about not being given this win when W.L. Johnson couldn't continue because he had a big piece of glass stuck in his foot, says James Owens. And he had a good point. I mean, probably should have won when Johnson was unable to continue. June 4th, 1880, Louisville, Kentucky at the Standard Theater. And we talked last episode about one of the early women's matches. Ida Alb beat Marcia of France in an early women's match, 1880. Well, here we've got perhaps, in America anyway, they probably did it in France, but here in America, the first intergender match I'm aware of. Louisville, Kentucky's your answer to that trivia question. Ida Alb beat Albert Mark. Now, you may be doing like I did and said, wait a minute. Albert Mark, M-A-C, M-A-R-C? Ain't that a little too close to Lucian Mark? You're correct. Albert Mark is claimed to be Lucian Mark's brother. Now, I'm not so sure this isn't Lucian Mark. So now Lucian Mark's found him a brother, by the way, even though he was maybe related to Andre Cristal, and it's all very confusing. Refer to the last show. It's Andre Cristal, and his orbit of people is very, very confusing. But the presumed brother of Lucian Mark, Albert Mark, does the job to Ida Alb in an intergender Greco-Roman wrestling match. 2 out of 3 falls. And look, this Ida Alb, she's going to continue to wrestle some. She's going to continue to challenge men, wrestle women and stuff too. So 1880, she is truly a pioneer of women's wrestling. Ida Alb, I-D-A-A-L-B. Read the book when it comes out here in probably September. Now, this is where I'm up to now, July of 1880. Allegheny Sports Zeitung. Allegheny Sports Zeitung, a sporting magazine out of Austria, begins publication, and it covers wrestling in Europe. So we get a little more organized records from over there. Although the scope of the book I'm doing, Dragon King Carl's Pioneer Wrestling Omnibus, is really American focused. It's focused on the origins and evolution of pro wrestling in America, not so much Europe. Europe predates America by a pretty good bit of having organized professional wrestling. France, of course, as well. We've talked about Germany and Poland in past episodes as well. But you get, and look, hey, there's really a lot of fascinating information about it. It's just beyond the scope of what I can do with this book. I can't get everything in this book as far as American wrestling goes if I start covering Europe as well. But there's some interesting stuff. I mean, Edwin Beebe is an interesting person out of England over there. So pretty interesting stuff. Some of the major notes I do get over here in the book, but I don't really go down that rabbit hole much. Now, July 5th, 1880, in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, G.W. Flagg defeated American collar and elbow champion H.M. Duffer for the championship of Vermont. They've made up their own belt now to have. I put a Dragon King Carl note in here. The newspaper reported that this was the third and decisive match between the two in recent days. Of course, we know they've wrestled much more than that. That each had previously won a match. The American Collar and Elbow Championship is never mentioned in these matches between G.W. Flagg and H.M. Duffer, and a prior newspaper article stated that H.M. Duffer was, quote, wrestling on a salary, which indicates these matches were under some type of special arrangement or exhibition, perhaps for a circus or carnival, though none is specifically mentioned in the articles. Whatever the case, at the time these matches were not considered for the American Collar and Elbow Championship. However, some papers reported it as for the Championship of Vermont. So very interesting, and I'm not sure really what to make of why G.W. Flagg never gets his run with the American Collar and Elbow title. What's so different? Because these were collar and elbow matches. I just don't know. I'm hopeful to find out in my research, but so far I don't have a real definitive conclusion. Now then, follow this again under the more things change, the more they stay the same. We've been talking about the real Andre Cristal, the fake Andre Cristal, Lucian Mark. Now, Lucian Mark may or may not have a brother that's losing to women in Louisville, Kentucky, and so on and so forth. Well, now enter into the conversation Henry Bauer. Yes, Henry Bauer, the supposed brother of Professor Theobald Bauer is out in the Southwest, and he's doing some stuff. July 8th, 1880, Tucson, Arizona. Henry Bauer, the brother, quote in quotation marks, of Professor Theobald Bauer, defeated Louis the Grizzly Bear Griffith for the Greco-Roman Championship of Arizona. Yes, this bears out for a Dragon King Carl note. Henry Bauer, the supposed brother of the celebrated Professor Theobald Bauer, had been putting on several Greco-Roman wrestling shows in Arizona during the summer of 1880. Besides Grizzly Bear, Henry Bauer also wrestled a Frenchman named Jacoby Marsalis, and they swapped this championship of the Arizona territory back and forth as well. So very interesting. And that's where the depth of my research goes to at this point in 1880, although here I have some other notes. These notes are subject to change. I have noticed in my subject to change notes, the stuff I originally had, many times the dates need to be changed. Many times the whole story is not written. August 6, 1880, Coney Island, New York, the Caledonia Athletic Games are held. There are several wrestlers who participated in a tug of war, including Edwin Beebe, Duncan C. Ross, and J.C. Daly. August 24th, 1880, Duncan C. Ross versus J.C. Daly with Scottish title versus Irish title at Park Garden. Providence, Rhode Island, with a reported 8,000 fans in attendance, making it one of the largest drawing shows in American wrestling history up to this point. It was a festival card held on a platform on a lake. And yes, I think someone got thrown into the water. Again, I haven't deep dive researched this through the papers yet, but it's coming. I can't wait to follow up on that. September 8th, 1880, Marlborough, Massachusetts. American Collar and Elbow champion H.M. Duffer beats Duncan C. Ross. However, Ross is going to claim the championship. On October 11th of 1880, Duncan C. Ross wins the American Collar and Elbow Championship from H.M. Duffer in Providence, Rhode Island. H.M. Duffer had been the American Collar and Elbow champion since June of 1879, when he had defeated James Owens for the title. However, of course, he had lost multiple times since then to G.W. Flagg for whatever reason. But now, Duffer gets the belt back pretty quickly. November 18th, 1880, H.M. Duffer recaptures the American Collar and Elbow title from Duncan C. Ross as the second time Duffer has held the title. November 20th, 1880, New York City, New York, at Lyric Hall, with between 800 and 900 people in attendance, Greco-Roman rules. Edwin Beebe wrestled Clarence Whistler to a 4-hour draw. December 16th, 1880, John McMahon wins the American Collar and Elbow Championship from H.M. Duffer in Boston, Massachusetts. And, he's finally elevated again to the top, especially with McLaughlin missing in action. John McMahon and H.M. Duffer are your top two people in wrestling. William Muldoon in Greco-Roman likes to think he is and may well be in New York. But this is an era of change. This 1880 into 1880 is an era where things are shifting. December the 21st, 1880, Brooklyn, New York, at the rink, Greco-Roman rules. Edwin Beebe wrestled Clarence Whistler to a 4-hour and 50-minute draw. And this may have actually been two separate matches with the times added together. Sadly, December 24th, 1880, James Jim Owens dies in Fairfield, Vermont from severe bronchial illness. So he fell ill and passed away. On Christmas 1880, New York City, New York, at Lion Brewery Hotel Hall with around 400 people in attendance, William Muldoon took on and defeated 3 men in succession. Louis Debout in 3 minutes, Muldoon's brother, Martin Muldoon, in 10 minutes, and Otto Brickenhoff, Louis Baudou again in 5 minutes, and Martin Muldoon again in 4 minutes. So 1880 is an interesting year, transitioning from your national celebrities of Colonel James H. McLaughlin, John McMahon, James Owens, and now H.M. Duffer. You've got Duncan C. Ross rising up. You've got Andre Cristal in the mix, all kinds of places, Professor Theobald Bauer, he's really cooled off since his peak, but Professor William Miller is still important, and William Muldoon is on the rise. And so when we come back on the second half of the show, we'll take a look at some more Pioneer-era wrestling notes, news, and history right after this.
We depend on Patreon support for our website and podcast network. In order to continue these podcasts you enjoy, we need you to visit whenitwascool.com and pledge at least $1. You'll gain access to lots of exclusive podcasts, newsletters, and more. Sign up is quick, simple, and can be canceled at any time. Whenitwascool.com and click any Patreon link. Thank you.
So I thought it would be interesting, since we here at 1,000 Hours and in my own research for my upcoming book are entering the era of William Muldoon, 1880, basically roughly 1880. So 20 years before Frank Gotch comes along is William Muldoon. So up to this point, up to William Muldoon, just like the Pioneer era and what I'm doing in the upcoming Pioneer era omnibus book, what I'm doing here at 1,000 Hours is all pre-Frank Gotch. Now is a good time to stop and look at, okay, everything we've done so far really has been pre-William Muldoon. We're just now getting to Muldoon, 1880. So for the next 20 years, roughly, a little less than that, Muldoon doesn't have a super long career. He's going to be associated with the most important person in pro wrestling. So before William Muldoon, 1880 backwards into history, who were our top wrestlers? Now, I haven't sat down and actually written out a list. I probably will at some point. I may even do it for the book, break it down into rankings for this era. Now, again, like modern era wrestling, so much of this was fake and contrived and worked. It's hard to say with definitive accuracy even then. It's not like in boxing where you could say, hey, this person, look at this person's record and presume that most of it was legitimate. In wrestling, you can't do that. But up to 1880, pre-Muldoon, there's no question in my mind the most important person was Colonel James H. McLaughlin. He won the 1870 Detroit International Tournament. He was winning matches before that. The American Collar and Elbow Championship existed before that. Homer Lane was the champion at the time. After McLaughlin wins that Detroit International Tournament and the Diamond Championship belt, he was not at that point the American Collar and Elbow champion, but within weeks he does beat Homer Lane for that. So those belts kind of run concurrently. You could even say they're the same thing for a while. And basically, for whenever McLaughlin wanted to wrestle, McLaughlin was the top wrestler and was winning. Now, John McMahon is also strongly in that pre-1880 zone. Now, we've just talked about him winning the American Collar and Elbow Championship here in 1880, and he's going to go forth on for a while. But he was important. He was every bit the number 2 to Colonel James H. McLaughlin. Now, who do you put as number 3? Because now you've got to say, I have to say, well, now he's got to start juggling styles. I would say the most important person after that was Professor Theobald Bauer, but then you get into Greco-Roman, and you could get to the whole very valid argument that one was, at least for a while, a more legitimate style than the other. But Bauer becomes very popular in the United States. He popularizes Greco-Roman wrestling. He does so with Professor William Miller, no doubt, but it was Theobald Bauer driving it in those early days. So for me, I would put of the most important wrestling, no matter what style, personalities there were pre-Muldoon, you've got Colonel James H. McLaughlin, number 1, John McMahon, number 2, Professor Theobald Bauer, number 3. I would say Professor William Miller is number 4. Then you get in, you can argue, semantics. You could argue Andre Cristal. You can argue Homer Lane. You can argue even H.M. Duffer. H.M. Duffer is pretty strong contender to be even higher on that list, even though he's still got a lot of career ahead of him. So maybe if you just prefer the collar and elbow people above the Greco-Roman people, maybe you put him just below John McMahon then for this pre-1880 era. And I think that's a pretty solid list of them right there. I think it's pretty solid ranking, the best you could look at. So now as we transition, now 1880 and forward, William Muldoon's going to shoot probably toward the top of that list. McLaughlin's going to come back. He's going to be around periodically, but not in any real meaningful long-term sort of way. John McMahon, as we just talked about, he's going to be the American collar and elbow champion again, so he's certainly there in the conversation. Professor Theobald Bauer still going to be around a little bit. Miller's going to be around some. H.M. Duffer for sure. Clarence Whistler's going to move up that list. Duncan C. Ross certainly is going to move up that list. James Owens, of course, as we said, has now passed away. And maybe James Owens, maybe you put him on that pre-1880 list somewhere as well. But I thought it would be interesting to get us kind of a baseline. I've gone to the Wikipedia page for William Muldoon. And so in the coming weeks, I'm going to be really doing my deep dive stuff into Muldoon for the book. And so let's see if what we find that's accurate and what we find that's inaccurate about this. Let's just take this Wikipedia article with a grain of salt and see what turns out to be right and correct or misleading. All right, so William Muldoon, born May 25th, 1852. He dies June 3rd, 1933. He was an 81-year-old man when he died. He had been the president of the New York State Athletic Commission. He was a sporting man, for all of his adult life. William Muldoon was an American Greco-Roman wrestling champion and a physical culturist and the first chairman of the New York State Athletic Commission. He once wrestled a match that lasted over 7 hours. Actually, he did that multiple occasions. We just talked about one of them. And there will be others. Nicknamed the Solid Man, which was a song, by the way, Muldoon established himself as a champion in Greco-Roman wrestling in the 1880s and over the years gained a remarkable measure of public influence that would continue through his days as a health farm proprietor in Westchester County and his service on the New York State Athletic Commission. Muldoon was a mainstay in New York sports for over 50 years. So much like to the winner goes the spoils, much of the reputation and the title of the most important wrestler of the Pioneer era, William Muldoon, has to be owed to some degree to the fact William Muldoon was around a long time in prominent positions to tell that story. Now, he's not going to be wrong by much. I'm going to be interested to see if, in my mind, if the facts, if the evidence sustains that he was more important to the origin and evolution of professional wrestling in America than was Colonel James H. McLaughlin. Right now, I say no, but I'm just now getting into the deep, so I reserve the right to change my opinion about that. But let's see. His early life, he was born in Allegheny County, New York. Muldoon was the son of Irish immigrants Patrick Muldoon and Maria Donahoe. His father was a farmer. Showing a knack for strength athletics at a young age, Muldoon gained a local reputation as a standout in caliber tossing, weightlifting, sprinting, and amateur wrestling. His youth was otherwise characterized by a brutish, flash temper and his desire to be treated with the respect of an adult despite being a child. Yeah, Muldoon definitely come across as entitled in a lot of ways. Muldoon journeyed to Paris to serve as a volunteer in the French army in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, where he met publisher James Gordon Bennett Jr., who told Muldoon that he had the potential to be the best Greco-Roman wrestler in the world if he concentrated on it. I have not determined any legitimacy to that yet. Let's put that on the, let's see about it. Their note says this is according to Ring magazine publisher Nate Fleischer in his volume From Milo to Lundos. There is a lot of inaccurate information in that book, by the way, From Milo to Lundos. That book was written in 1936, so that book was 50 years after what we're talking about right now, so chew on that for a minute. By 1876, Muldoon was living in New York City, where he accepted appointment to the New York Police Department at the behest of Senator John Morrissey, former bare-knuckle boxing champion. At the time of his resignation in 1881, Muldoon was a detective. In 1880, Muldoon gained recognition when he won the World Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship with a win over the title claimant Theobald Bauer. His rise to prominence brought challengers from across the globe, including Edwin Beebe, Tom Cannon of England, Donald Denny of Scotland, Matsura Sorikichi of Japan, Carl Abbs of Germany, William Miller of Australia, and John McMahon and Clarence Whistler, the latter being Muldoon's opponent in a titanic 7-hour match in 1881 where neither could gain a single fall. Following the celebrated match with Whistler, Muldoon assembled an athletic combination that toured the country promoting athletic events and defending his title against all comers. Muldoon became involved in theater around this time. Imagine that. Imagine a Greco-Roman wrestler in the 1800s hippodroning around, becoming involved in theater. Well, this is true. It stemmed from his fame in athletics. In 1883, he shared the bill with Maurice Barrymore, a boxer turned actor, in Madame Modjeska's production of Shakespeare's As You Like It. Barrymore played Orlando, and Muldoon was Charles the Wrestler. In 1887, he appeared on Broadway as the Fighting Gaul in Spartacus. Muldoon was one of a party of gentlemen entertained by Robert Emmett Oldham, brother of women's rights activist Charlotte Oldham Smith, on the morning of May 19, 1885, the day he jumped from the Brooklyn Bridge and was killed. Muldoon assisted in unsuccessful resuscitation efforts and summoned an ambulance, which arrived too late to save Oldham. In 1889, Muldoon trained John L. Sullivan for his famous 75-round fight against Jake Kilrain for the World Heavyweight Bare-Knuckle Boxing Championship. He had done so on a friendly wager and offered to absorb expenses if Sullivan lost. Sullivan won, and Muldoon gained national notice for restoring the boxing champion to fighting form. Muldoon's methods for accomplishing Sullivan's rejuvenation drew much public interest. On May 28th, Muldoon and Sullivan would have an exhibition wrestling bout contested under London prize ring rules that ended in a 5-5 draw. The two would later have a 3-round bout where Muldoon would win 2 of the 3 bouts. Muldoon was never defeated for his Greco-Roman championship. He wrestled in his final championship match in 1890, so his career was roughly 11 years, basically. He defeated Evan Lewis in Philadelphia. Despite being implored by promoters and challengers to come out of retirement, Muldoon never wrestled another finish match or claimed any active championship. He symbolically passed his World Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship to his protege, Ernest Robert, whom Lewis later defeated. Muldoon would make his final public appearance as a wrestler in a charity exhibition match against Robert at Madison Square Garden in 1894, and that is also true. That same year, Muldoon moved his health farm from Belfast, New York to White Plains. As he tapered off direct involvement in professional athletics, he devoted more time to devising his system on restoring one's health. Muldoon continued to train boxers and wrestlers until boxing was banned in New York at the turn of the century. In 1900, Muldoon opened what would become the work of his life, the well-known health institute, the Olympia, at Purchase, New York. In subsequent years, through the success of the Olympia, Muldoon would again gain national notice as he treated such notables there as U.S. Ambassador to Great Britain Joseph Hodges Coate, publisher Ralph Pulitzer, Senator Chauncey Depew, Major General J. Franklin Bell, essayist Elbert Hubbard, novelist Theodore Dreiser, and Secretary of State Elu Root, who was sent to Muldoon by President Roosevelt. In 1907, there was talk that Muldoon would be appointed to the president's cabinet to oversee physical health. For his uncompromised methods at his health farm, Muldoon was dubbed the Professor. Journalist Nellie Bly was the first woman to complete Muldoon's course. In the spring of 1909, Muldoon made a final return to the stage in the theatrical tour organized in benefit of the Lambs. Muldoon dedicated a Civil War monument to the town of Belfast, New York, listing the names of local veterans in 1915, including that of his older brother John. In 1921, Muldoon was personally tapped by Governor Nathan Lewis Miller as the inaugural chairman of the New York State Athletic Commission when professional boxing status was legally restored in New York. While on the New York State Athletic Commission, Muldoon's czarish decrees characterized his inflexible sense of integrity to the press and sporting public. He was dubbed in the papers the Iron Duke. And look, he made a lot of decisions on pro wrestling that were very questionable. He was one of those old dudes who was back in my day, back when wrestling was real, even though Muldoon worked in many worked matches. He was one of them, one of those kind. In 1927, Muldoon was profiled by the New Yorker magazine, and in 1929, the Saturday Evening Post. A biography was published in 1928 with a foreword by Jack Dempsey. Muldoon died at age 81 in Westchester County, New York, and he was interred in a grandiose private mausoleum at Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla, New York. Sometime after the end of his wrestling career and before the turn of the century, Muldoon had claimed for years that he was born in 1845 and 7 years older than his age verified in the Muldoon Family Bible, which documents his real birth year. In 1996, Muldoon was inducted in the International Boxing Hall of Fame. In 2004, he was inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum under the Pioneer Era category. He's also, this doesn't say this, but he was also in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame, as well he should be. Under the personal section, Muldoon claimed to be a lifelong bachelor. However, he was married twice. The first marriage ended in divorce, the second in separation. His housekeeper of 30 years, Leonie Luttringer, left her entire estate to Muldoon in 1922. It has just been discovered through DNA that William and Lenore had a child that was placed with the Sisters of Charity of New York and eventually placed on an orphan train ending up in Indiana. Oh, I do declare at the scandal here for Mr. Muldoon. It was revealed later in his life that he had adopted his longtime secretary, Margaret Farrell. She received his entire estate at his death. Muldoon was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 1931, though his doctors did not reveal the nature of his illness to him. Muldoon died 2 years later. Retired boxing champion Gene Tunney, a disciple of Muldoon, remarked to the New York Times at the time of Muldoon's death, "All I know about training I learned from him. His patience, intellectual courage, and wisdom were inspirational." Muldoon was interred at Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla, New York. Muldoon was a strong advocate of compulsory military service, equestrianism, physical culture, and the Boy Scouts of America, citing the latter as the only organization left devoted to leadership building for young men. Boy, how have times changed. Other championships. The World Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship twice. So it says here. We'll look at that here separately. He is in numerous halls of fame, as one could imagine. Now then, let's see here. Here's William Muldoon dies in his sleep. William Muldoon dies in his sleep at 88. I thought it just said he was 81 years old. I guess they're going by his fake date of birth here. He looks like an old curmudgeon in this photo too. You ought to see him. He looks like one of those yelling at the sky old men, like, "Get off my yard, young, run backwards." Rawr. Yeah, Muldoon. All right, so the World Greco-Roman Championship. Let's take a look at this highly suspect championship. The World Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship, as decided by Wikipedia.org, the World/American Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship and the World/European Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship was a Greco-Roman professional wrestling championship contested for throughout the continent of Australia, Europe, and North America. The title existed from 1875 through approximately 1937. The final champion, George Hackenschmidt, defeated American heavyweight champion Tom Jenkins on May 5, 1905 in New York City, New York, to unify both titles and become the undisputed world heavyweight champion. Number one wrestler, Andre Cristal. We presume the real Andre Cristal. Times 1. Date 1, not in there. Location, not there. Notes. Claims United States Greco-Roman title. Loses to William Miller in New York, but continues to claim the title due to injury during the match. rematch on November 9th, 1875 ends in a draw. All the real notes of that will be in the book. Number 2 on the list is Theobald Bauer. Location, New York City, billed as World Greco-Roman Champion. Next on the list with 2 reigns now is Andre Cristal. Location, New York City. No date, no notes, no nothing. Next, William Miller. No dates, no notes, no nothing. Theobald Bauer, Cincinnati. No other notes. William Miller, billed as American Greco-Roman heavyweight champion in New York, still champion as of June 15th, 1877. William Muldoon, New York City, defeats Theobald Bauer, announces his temporary retirement in September of 1882. And Bauer, of course, claimed the match was worked. Duncan C. Ross, Jacksonville, Florida, defeats Theobald Bauer. Theobald Bauer wins the belt sometime, somewhere, New Orleans, Louisiana, no other notes. William Muldoon, New York City, vacates in 1891 upon retirement. Gives it to Ernest Robert. Awarded by Muldoon upon his retirement, December 31st, 1891. One source says Muldoon awards the title to Ernest Robert in 1887. I'll try to hash all that out for you in the book. Also defeats French title claimant Apollyon on July 25th, 1892 in New York, New York. Also awarded the European Greco-Roman Heavyweight Championship on September 26, 1894 in Hamburg, Germany. Evan Strangler Lewis defeats Robert March the 2nd in 1893 in New Orleans in a mixed-style match to become the American Heavyweight Champion. Magnus Becht Olsen, New York City. And then sometime before the turn of the century, probably Ernest Robert in Copenhagen, Denmark. And then it goes on from there. But, of course, here on the Pioneers of Wrestling, we 1,000-hour show. Forgot to name my own show there for a minute. Doesn't matter. We can all be champion. I'm Greco-Roman champion of Wrestling Observer. I got a medal to prove it. I'll go get one. Anyway, so we'll hash all this out going forward as I continue to deep dive into this era. I'm so looking forward. I've wanted so bad to get to Muldoon because Muldoon's career, again, it's about 11 years. It's mostly contained to New York. He does meet a wide variety of international wrestlers, all that whole list I read off earlier, the Carl Abs and people like that. Okay, so that's all in his favor. But I have long suspected that he is considered the grandfather of American professional wrestling, more because he was a celebrity in New York than his actual accomplishments, especially when compared to McLaughlin, even compared to McMahon, quite frankly, even compared to Theobald Bauer, even though, you got to take Bauer for what he is, and that's a worker. But he was a very popular worker who really widely distributed Greco-Roman as a entertainment style. The newspapers made no mistake that people seemed to know exactly what the gig was with Greco-Roman wrestling back then. It was hippodrome. It was entertainment. And I think Bauer, that's what wrestling is today. But who's arguing wrestling's real today? Is anybody even still making that tired, worn out argument? It was tired and worn out in 1880, much less 1980, much less 2024. Who cares? It was entertainment. People were buying tickets to it. And whatever Bauer and Miller and Andre Cristal and fake Andre Cristal and even William Muldoon were doing back then, they were doing something that captured the imagination of the sporting public in America. And, some appeared not in on it, some appeared in on it. It's very interesting stuff. There's nothing quite like professional wrestling. When we go to a movie, we sit and watch the movie and, we know it for what it is. The most recent one I think I've seen is, Deadpool and Wolverine. Well, we know these aren't real human beings doing these real super heroic things, acting this way. with, that we know that's not real. We go in understanding that. And it's fine. It's perfectly acceptable entertainment. Wrestling, for some reason, and they bring a lot of it on itself, is like magic in that, hey, we want you to come and believe. We want you to see that. But even magic, we know it's not real. We know it's illusions. We know it's trickery. We know it's mind games, playing tricks on your eyes. We know that, and it's fine. The performers know that we know. Wrestling is this weird thing in that we all know it ain't on the level. In 1880, they knew it wasn't on the level, and we were fine with that. But the performers themselves seem to be like, no, this is real. This is actual. Like their manhood, their it depended upon the legitimacy of that, and it didn't. It was entertainment, no different than going to see Shakespeare or whatever. They didn't, the people playing that Beethoven opera, they didn't write that. They're just playing. Why wrestling? Why was wrestling different? Why did wrestling have to try to convince you it was real, legitimate, on the level? Why couldn't it just be a show? And it was a show. They just couldn't admit to it. It's always fascinated me, even as a kid growing up in late 70s, early 80s, watching wrestling on TV. Every time an adult would walk by, they'd go, that's fake, right? And I'd be like, so? Who cares? What does that even mean? Why does that even matter? It's like I walk through and MASH is on and they're all right there and I'll go, is that, it's fake, right? What's the point of that? Doesn't make any. It never made sense to me then. Doesn't make sense to me now. And looking back historically, I find it very comical that it wasn't real to them either. But yet, the McLaughlins of the world, the McMahons of the world, boy, they were, defending this stuff. Oh, there's Lucian, three-fingered Lucian Mark saying, oh no, it is real. It wasn't real. Very interesting stuff. There's nothing quite like professional wrestling in the history of entertainment. Well, thank you all very much for listening. This has been 1,000 Hours. This is hour number 55 of 1,000 Hours. Thank you again, Slim. I think Slim became a Patreon supporter when it was cool. And we hope you will too. If you do, I'll dedicate an hour of this show to you. If you're already a Patreon supporter or you just want to sponsor an episode of this show, you can do so by PayPal or Cash App. Front page of When It Was Cool, just make a direct donation. Most people are doing between $10 and $50. Whatever you think this research is valuable. You think this is worthwhile. Are you entertained? I say as I fake Greco-Roman throw you into a pit, If you are, then hey, consider sponsoring us. Consider being a Patreon supporter at whenitwascool.com. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying listening to the show as much as I'm enjoying doing it. And I'll see you here again soon with some new stuff.
Here's a soundbite from the Dragon King Carl Classic Wrestling Podcast from whenitwascool.com. We get the Patriots. We've already talked about Firebreaker Chip, Todd Champion. Now, now, mind you, remember, I said these are all essentially male strippers. Van Hammer, the guitar guy. How did somebody not name the Army guy Dale? How was he not Dale Champion? So you could have had Chippendales. I mean, have I got to go back in time and book 1992 WCW just so we can have the tag team of Chip and Dale? You can get more from this podcast and many others by going to whenitwascool.com. And remember, support us on Patreon.